Afternoon, good evening. I am Prophet Kiana with a Bible teacher today. This is part two of Purim. Part two of Purim. So Holy Spirit allow me to be led through to be able to fully release this entire Bible teaching about the Purim part two. Guide me until I'm sure to be able to release it. That needs to come forth. Guide me with everything that needs to be spoken as well as whatever. Guide me with being able to speak everything that you would like for me to speak and not what I want to speak or whatever is given to me spiritually allowed to be released in this message. Guide me with divine download as well. So allow my mind to be open to release what needs to come forward. What's up, everybody? So this is part two about Purim. So yesterday we learned that Purim is celebrated on a certain day in a certain month. So we know that the edit is sent out on the 13th, commanded by the king. So the king can only sit out an edit to have something reversed. And so we know that Purim is a lot that Haman had cast upon the Jews to attack the Jews. So now this is about the reversal of the Jews having the upper hand over the enemy. And no longer the enemy is able to or come against the Jews. People who are connected to God, who are chosen by God. And so we also learned that the satraps and the governors and the king's administration and the nobles have helped the Jews to accomplish having the power over their enemies and fighting against their enemies and being able to do to their enemies what the enemy had done to them. So reversing what the enemy done. So we learned that no longer can an enemy attack you with something. Because what the enemy had done to you is reversed back to the enemy. So it goes back to the enemy. So what the enemy meant for evil, God intended for good. And so then we also learned that the Jews had killed 500 men. And also we learned about how the 10 sons of Haman was killed. And also what the sons of Haman names mean. And also we learned that how information was brought back to the king. And the king goes to the queen to let her know what had transpired, what had happened. And he asks the queen, what is your petition? What is your request? So the queen is able to ask of things. And so Queen Esther asks for the edit to continue to the next day. And requested that the sons of Haman be impaled on a pole. And so I will be in the book of Esther, chapter 9, verse 14. So the king commanded that this be done. So what the queen had just asked for, the king commanded it that it be done. Because he said it would be granted to you. So he granted what she petitioned and requested. An edit was issued in Susa. So there is another edit issued in Susa. And they appalled the 10 sons of Haman. So, because Haman is the one that put out the order, who's connected to him is his sons. Because of what the enemy done, whoever's connected to the enemy gets attacked as well. The Jews and Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar. So we learned that the Jews came together on the month of Adar. And it was on the 14th day. So there'll be a gathering of God's people and the chosen ones. And they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. So plunder is just the goods. So they did not touch their enemy's plunder. But they was able to have victory over their enemies. They was able to stop their enemies. Put to death their enemies. This is spiritually and physically. To silence your enemies. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. So, a remaining group of the Jews in the king's provinces assembled themselves, meaning they gathered together, came together to get relief from their enemies. So there will be a gathering of a group of God's people and chosen ones who will come together to get relief from their enemies. Whatever their enemies have done in whatever place or whatever area they have attacked the man first. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. So they was able to silence a large group of people who was against them, hated them. But they did not touch their goods. So you will be able to silence a large number of people as a group. As you come together to take out your enemies. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th, they rested and made it a day of feasting. So, this was done on a certain day, which is the 13th day. The day where the first edict was commanded to go out. Because the king commanded it. Then on the 14th day, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews of Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th day. Well, on the 13th and the 14th. And then on the 15th. So a certain group of Jews came together on the 13th, 14th, 15th of the month. So a certain group will celebrate different ways. Because the Jews that was in Susa are celebrating the 13th, 14th, and 15th. But the Jews that was left in the provinces of the kings celebrate the 13th and 14th, battle on the 13th, the 14th, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. But then the other group of Jews in Susa They rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. So each group of people will celebrate differently the month of Adar for Purim. And so you always want to either look on a Jewish calendar or the Gregorian calendar to find out what day will Purim be on. The Jewish successor had came together on these certain days to celebrate Purim. That is why real Jews and those living in villages observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. So, other Jews in a certain area celebrate keep the 14th as a day of joy and feasting. And some will celebrate just the 14th as a day of feasting and joy and giving gifts. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far. So Mordecai has the king ring. So whatever Mordecai is able to stamp and seal it with the king's ring, whatever is being released. So there will be notice about the events because Mordecai has recorded it. The events. It has sent notice out, sent word out about the celebration for Purim. To have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. So, it is to be done annually, to be celebrated. The 14th and 15th of Adar. Adar is just the 12th month on the Jewish calendar. So it'll be noticed about the annual celebration for these days to be done. As the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as a month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and they mourn into a day of celebration. So I'll let you know the reason why we're celebrating these days. It's about getting relief. It's about having victory. It's about joy. It's about free, having an upper hand. He wrote them to observe the days as day of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So this is wrote to keep these days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So this is about giving. This is about feasting. This is about joy. This is about celebrating. About having victory over your enemies. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. So this is about something being consistently done. It's about keeping what has been already established to do. For Haman's son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast a pur. that is the lot for their ruin and destruction. So because of Haman, who plotted against the Jews, who devised the scheme, who plotted against the Jews. He was against Mordecai only, but then he hated all Jews. Because of what he did, things had been reversed. Now the Jews have the upper hand over their enemies. Children of God, people of God. So you would know why or why this became the day. Or reverse. Therefore, these days were called Purim. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued with written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his head, and that he and his sons should be impaled on the poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pure, because everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should, without fail, observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. So, what Haman had did to the Jews, the king had no understanding of what Haman had done until it was brought to his attention about what had transpired against the Jews. So the king had reversed what Haman had put out against the Jews back to Haman and the people that hated the Jews. And so these 2 days needs to be celebrated by descendants at the appointed time and days. Purim needs to be celebrated at all times, annually. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family and in every province and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews. Nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So, these days need to be celebrated yearly at their appointed times, to never die out, to never stop being celebrated, always to be celebrated by descendants and everything. No descendants should stop celebrating these days, because they represent about having victory over your enemies, about the reversal of having the upper hand over your enemies, of being able to come against your enemies. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. So Queen Esther and Mordecai came together to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. So Queen Esther has to go to the king first. But of course, Mordecai has the ring the king has given him. So notice, second notice about the confirming of the second Purim. Second letter concerning the Purim. We'll go out. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance to establish these days of Purim at the designated times, as Mordecai, the Jew of Queen Esther, had decreed for them, and as they established for themselves and their descendants in regard to times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. So, there will be notice about the Purim. It will be word out about Purim being celebrated, as well as because Queen Esther had decreed and recorded, meaning has written it down to be done. And so it needs to be celebrated by descendants yearly, annually. Because it is a joyous time to have victory over your enemies, to celebrate these days. It's about giving gifts, feasting, resting, and having victory over your enemies. Because the Queen Esther decreed, it needs to be celebrated yearly. So I don't know who needs to hear this message, but Holy Spirit allowed to go forth to will.